To improve the implementation of the WFD, it's clear that we need to take the WFD impact. It's a basis. So any of these proposals to undermine the WFD, introduce new exemptions, amend core principles, or delay timelines, it should be strongly opposed. So, okay, perfect. So I'm actually, I think, in my last slide. So to sum up, we need significantly increased ambition by the member states to reach the objectives by 2027, which is basically tomorrow. It should be aided by enforcement action by the European Commission when these rules are not followed. And we need, as I said, that water protection objectives are streamlined into other pieces of legislation, such as agricultural and industrial chemical policies to avoid conflicting efforts. And sadly, last point I had to add, any attempts to weaken or undermine the WFD needs to be strongly opposed. So that was it. Those are my contact details. In case you would like to reach out, we're also on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also on LinkedIn. I didn't have them all, but you can find us there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I hand over to Paul Brotherton from Wetlands International Bureau. And Mr. Brotherton will introduce a new NGO call for a new EU law that links climate with water resilience.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the organizers for the interesting program, the invitation to speak, and a nice introduction. And also the speakers today, I think I want to build on some of the presentations you've heard, particularly what Sarah, Caroline, Daniela, and Peter were saying today. First of all, who are we? As Wetlands International Europe, we are an association of NGO members, much smaller than EEB. We're more of a boutique, celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, but we're the only NGO working on wetland ecosystems exclusively. And since there's no one EU wetland policy, we are working across many policy areas to try and protect and restore wetlands, advocating for strong policies and their enforcement, implementation, and funding. We're also working with our feet in the water directly in projects around Europe and in this region of Europe. I'm working in an upper Danube tributary called the Latvica in eastern Slovakia, looking at some of these same challenges of water resilience in a landscape and how you reconnect floodplains. First of all, definitions. So resilience, which is the key word of the day. Why are we talking about resilience? Of course, we're seeing all the floods and the droughts in Europe, and it's the question of how do we resist these flood and drought events, and how can we recover from them? And we're talking about this, of course, is because we're feeling climate change through experiencing it through water. And I find it a bit remarkable that in 2020, when the Green Deal communication came out, it barely mentions, I think it mentions droughts once, I think, fires once, and maybe it was, okay, floods once, fires once, droughts, not at all. No one was thinking about droughts in 2020. And of course, all we talk about now are the sort of what we call the whiplash cycle between floods and droughts. The other thing I want to introduce to you today is the term natural sponge. In addition to my title, I would say I'm an evangelist for natural sponges. And what is a natural sponge? Most famously, someone who lives in a pineapple under the sea. But I think what is clear is most everyone from a certain young age knows what a sponge does. It absorbs water and releases it slowly. And why is this significant? Because it's part of official EU speak in the adaptation strategy of 2021. And the adaptation strategy was part of the Green Deal, but I think there's a sense that it's not where the major action was. It didn't call for new binding laws, didn't offer dedicated funding, and so there's a feeling among many actors, I think, and borne out by what we're seeing, that more action is needed on adaptation and sponges. And why? Because we've lost, as you've heard, so much of our sponge capacity in the landscape. These are our water stores, and therefore our loss of water resilience. As we heard in Hungary, over I think 84% of wetlands lost, and that's kind of typical for Europe. So our sponge capacity is greatly degraded. And so this is a typical, what we'd say, sponge landscape that we're familiar with in some of the, what we'd say, the headwaters in northwestern Europe, say the river Rhine or the Meuse River, where you have these upper catchments and sloping valleys. And these valley floors have a strong regulatory influence on the water. They can either retain the water, which is running off from the slopes, or as you see now, they're engineered really to send water downstream as quickly as possible, and that's drainage for agriculture, plantation, forest, of course, infrastructure. When you get to roads, then it's running off of roads, and when you see major precipitation events, then that water is ending up where people live. And of course, most memorably for us in 2021, in Belgium and Germany, when over 200 people died. And the sort of interesting thing there is the worst flooding was in these upper catchments. They weren't densely populated areas. These were small communities, whereas the main Rhine River was barely affected at all. So what we call our natural sponge solution is really restoring the water retention capacity of these landscapes. And we've done some research on this over the years and published a peer-reviewed article this year that really found multi-benefits from this sort of sponge restoration. As you can see there, flood peak reductions significantly at local scale. So really effective measures for both floods and droughts, higher base flows, but also the co-benefits here. It's a reduction of pollutants like nitrogen and phosphorus, and then carbon storage and improving habitats for biodiversity. So I'll come back to this UCRA report that's already been mentioned today with some of my key takeaways and why what leads me to national is some of these are already mentioned, but I think it's important to note that the report from the European Environment Agency says that the risks are outpacing the development and implementation of EU policies. And so our policies aren't keeping up with what's happening with climate change. And it's putting our funding mechanisms at risk. So all the damage and emergency response, it will increasingly strain the EU's finances. So the recommendation here was that stronger policy action is urgently needed, not my word, but the European Environment Agency's word, urgently, and a shift to more preventative and low regret measures. And also a systems-based approach for resilience and climate change. And so this was earlier in the year, and I also want to mention the council conclusions that came out of the Belgian presidency, which was the first half of the year, and this gets us closer to the water resilience legislation I want to talk about as well. The Belgian presidency put an emphasis on adaptation. They hosted a couple of water-related events, including one in Liège, Belgium, which was highly impacted by the floods in 2021. And you could really feel the sense of trauma there that they had experienced from the floods resonating years later. And with colleagues, we really pushed the Belgian presidency to emphasize nature-based solutions in their conclusions. So you can see the last line there, application of nature-based solutions such as conservation, restoration of wetlands and other freshwater ecosystems. So I think this is what's possible from civil society pushing on the presidencies to come out with strong conclusions. Was also mentioned earlier as part of her re-election as president this year. Ursula von der Leyen called for a European water resilience strategy, and recognizing that the extreme weather, the floods, fires, droughts, also that our wetlands and grasslands are essential for regulating climate, ensuring food and water security, and managing our sources of water properly. So I think you have these two kind of maybe competing ideas that the EU both needs to get more competitive through the Draghi report, but also a lot of research coming out that we also really need to invest in restoring our ecosystems, or it's going to cost us even more later. And we are part of Living Rivers Europe. It's an NGO coalition in Brussels of organizations working on freshwater policy, and that also includes EEB, WWF, the Nature Conservancy, European Anglers Alliance, and European Rivers Network. And we started working on this question of water resilience and better adaptation to climate change. In 2023, we came out with this report. And I don't even need to read through a lot of these conclusions because you can read them in the conference statement you have printed out there. I think it nicely captures many of our recommendations, and some of the things we want to emphasize is that we need new laws in the EU to effectively adapt to climate change, and that we should have stricter requirements to create water reserves for catchments and stressed areas. We need more financing, such as for a sponges financing facility. And as I think some of these other asks were covered by the other speakers, I will mention climate proofing all new legislative acts. I think we live in a different world now than a few years ago. We need to, our policies need to evolve to recognize the new climate we're living in, and also recognizing here that there's still EU subsidies that are promoting the drainage of wetlands. So we really need to get rid of the harmful incentives that are damaging our freshwater ecosystems. So if I then leave you, I guess, with one thought on my experience in the past 15 years in Europe, it's that it's good we have ambition. We have a Green Deal. We have a nature restoration law. So as many speakers have said, we have good laws on the books. I think we also need to do more, especially when it comes to more robust measures on adaptation and resilience. You heard Daniela talking earlier about the call for a Blue Deal. So it's not just the NGO actors who are calling for more action on water. It's the European Economic and Social Committee, which is more calling for the Blue Deal. It's, of course, farmers are affected as well. I think what is different, and many of our NGO organizations are members of the EESC that's promoting the Blue Deal. We think that adaptation and water resilience starts with healthy freshwater ecosystems. Nature is our source of water, and that's something that maybe some of the other economic actors don't quite understand, but we want to put ecosystem-based adaptation at the center of what the EU is doing, and think that needs, in addition to what the Green Deal is offering us, it does need some additional policies, tools, incentives, and finance, because we need to dramatically upscale what we're doing with nature-based solutions, from pilots to landscapes. And this is complicated because you're talking about changing land use, whether it's farming, forestry, and where people live. But again, with the right re-incentivizing of payments and financing, I think our goal should be to unlock a restoration economy where there are economic benefits from the measures themselves, and all the benefits aren't just accruing downstream. So upstream, not just the cost, but the benefits as well. So I want to thank you for your attention, and we'll move to questions.
very much to all three of you. And please join me at the table because we will open the floor for questions and comments. We will have 25 minutes for this part of the session, so this allows us a more extensive discussion, a bit longer answers if needed. Are there any questions right now or comments in the audience? And my colleagues will help with the microphone.
If no one is there, I will ask one question to you. Paul, how realistic this new law that you presented, a new concept of law, the water resilience and climate law, how is this realistic to achieve? And the other question I had was to you about Wetland International. You said you're an NGO network, but if I'm correct, you have also government members of Wetlands International. If I'm correct, Hungary is one of the government members of Wetland International. Do you think you are as Hungary as your member, that they are going to do a little bit better on, let's say, for instance, on the sponge idea?
Yeah, Wetlands International Europe is, as I said, an association of NGOs. We are part of the global Wetlands International network. There are over 20 network offices in Wetlands International. We're one of them. The Global Wetlands International does have government members, a significant number of European members, and I think generally the representative members are people, of course, in those ministries where they want to do the right thing on these wetland issues, whether it's for biodiversity or for free-flowing rivers. Of course, it's a matter of their influence in those ministries and how their freedom to act as well. So, of course, I think yes, that varies significantly by country, and so yeah, Hungary is of course challenging in that civil society space. And your first question then on the prospect of new legislation, I think nothing makes decision makers act more quickly than catastrophes. So that is why we are talking about water resilience. I think also it's wanting to shift the narrative away from the nature restoration law. That was a very contentious and divisive issue. And I think water resilience, the plus side of this is it's an opportunity to talk about how we can achieve environmental objectives, but also make society safer. And so it's framing it in a way that we are protecting people and not just nature. So I think there is a demand to act. Of course, new legislation in the current political climate may be more challenging. Some political groups have adopted the call for new legislation in the European Parliament and in the European elections. I think, right now, of course, we are waiting to see then what the Commission will propose for a water resilience strategy, and there will be a struggle for how much ambition. Of course, again, we are pushing on the more ambitious end, but there are also people pushing that it means more money for built infrastructure and reservoirs, which we would argue is maladaptation. So I think this is the battle to come over the next who knows how long, at least the next year or so.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you. Yeah, I think all the presentations, and thank you for yours, have shown that the legal frameworks inside the European Union are perfect, but the Green Deal and Water Framework Directive and Farm to Fork, etc., provide a good legislation, so to speak. There is a certain gap between the legislation and the implementation, and there is a lack of enforcement. So my question is, do you think that civil society, in parallel to you, is properly prepared to put more legal pressure with financial consequences on the decision makers, or do we need stronger structures, whatever that might be? I know it's a vague question, but I would be keen to know your opinion on that.
I think yes. I think civil society definitely plays a big role, and as we sit in Brussels and we talk, address the European Commission and the European Parliament, the MEPs in the Parliament, but I think for the Council and the ministers, they listen more at what is happening at home. What Paul said is very true. When there is a catastrophe, we see action. And I think here it's also where civil society plays a big role in demanding change, asking their ministers to act, and maybe also helping to expose some of the issues at hand. I think also public awareness is really important. I think there is still a bit of a knowledge gap, in particular in relation to the costs that are related to either poor climate change adaptation, but also pollution. And I hope with better knowledge about this and the fact that we are often paying for someone else's pollution could trigger a bit of anger, rightfully so, among people. If they know that a certain part of their water bill, for example, is going to clean up pollutants that are put there by or emitted by agriculture, etc. Yeah, I don't know if that fully answers your question, but at least some response.
I can just add a bit more. I think legal remedies do play a role, and of course it's up to the Commission to enforce the laws, and we saw for a good while that there was a deliberate under enforcement and leniency there, and still I think there is a reluctance to go after member states too hard, and when NGOs do pursue legal remedies, it can take a really long time, and so more than a decade, and by that time it's you're in a very bad state of nature. But I think it brings up the point as civil society, we have a big challenge on for instance, the nature restoration law, to get make sure our own NGO networks are capacitated to participate in nature restoration plans and helping and persuading member states to pursue ambitious nature restoration plans. And so I think we, in that sense, have a big challenge ahead of us in addition to the existing legislation like the Water Framework Directive, where we are trying to still hold on to the good things without seeing it weakened, and also to push for even stronger next generation river basin management plans. So there's a really full agenda for civil society.
If I may take the floor and ask one question from Paul, and if I may play the devil's advocate, if I'm a decision maker and you present the idea of a new law that links climate with resilience, water resilience, as a decision maker may say that, well, we already have a nature restoration law which covers some of the activities and tools that you're proposing. Why would there be a need for an additional new law which would bring up new debates, new contentions within society between the different interest groups? How would you respond to that?
I think the nature restoration law, of course, is an important part of the equation. I think the Commission, when I hear them talk, also recognizes that we need to do a better job of retaining water in our landscapes, and that's not all about nature, of course. It is working landscapes whether it's agricultural landscapes, forested landscapes, and inhabited landscapes. And I think the cost to society of inaction here, and what you see in something like the UPRA report from the European Environment Agency, really points out that more action is urgently needed, or we're going to be seeing even worse consequences, and this is affecting the health and safety of society, but also the economics of how we produce power and move goods and grow food and provide drinking water. So I think there is an imperative there to do more.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have a question here. To add what, and maybe even the previous scientific speakers, because we heard already Caroline, Victor, Eva, and you with scientific results. So scientific results actually support what the civil society argues. So when we now talk about what civil society can do and what we suggest, but what do you think the scientific can add to convince the decision makers that we actually do a change?
It's hard to say that we can do our job, but if the decision maker doesn't allow us to do, it's a problem. So at least in Hungary, we have a problem also with the scientific background of the research, I mean the funding of this research. So I think at least at the European level, the scientists try to show the evidences which support, for instance, this nature restoration law. But I think the citizens and the civil society could make something. So we are not strong enough right now. But as for the civil society to support you, I could say that all of the projects which were based on the civil work, it has good results. And almost all of the positive example what I see in the WFT, almost all of them was based on civil programs and civil application. So at least in Hungary, it's very few which were made from the state.
And maybe one more question about, you mentioned, Paul, and I think Sarah as well, the cost, so cost of inaction. So if you don't do something, then you will lose. I would probably add that here in Hungary we have a lot of cost that is caused by wrong action. We will hear later after the coffee break one or two examples of this. But is there any research done on how much it is cost actually, that how big benefit we could have, for instance, from the nature restoration? Could you say something about this?
I can say something about this, but maybe not related to nature restoration law, basically because I focus mostly on pollution. But there was a report from the European Court of Auditors a few years back that clearly showed that it's the polluter pays principle, although enshrined in the EU treaties and being a policy, something that should underlie each EU law, it's still poorly implemented, and it's society that bears the main cost of pollution in Europe in various ways, through health exposure, but also for water treatment, etc. And again, I think we're also facing increasing costs as we're still not monitoring all relevant pollutants, and PFAS being the obvious one. The EU PFAS standards in drinking water, they come into force in 2026, and they are not based on the latest science from the European Food Safety Authority. And we have examples from those countries that have followed in the transposition of the European Drinking Water Directive, that have followed advice from the European Food Safety Authority in terms of PFAS, Sweden being one of them. In the city of Uppsala, where they have a lot of PFAS pollution from the armed forces training ground, and where they have now installed treatment to remove the PFAS to meet the legal drinking water threshold. The water bills jumped almost 30% in the beginning of this year. So I think this is what we are facing, and I hope that will trigger thoughts among people on what they're actually paying for on their water bill, and that it leads to a bit more awareness, and that the more focus is placed on where this pollution is coming from and who's actually responsible.
So just a short question. Do you think this is the real cost of water, what they are paying? I mean, the increase 30%, or it was before the real value of water?
I mean, this is partly due to the fact that they have installed PFAS removal, which is highly costly, and that is because Sweden has the new very strict PFAS limits. But of course, if you have lax limits, then you don't need to remove as much, and that's cheaper in the short term, but may result in higher health costs later on.
Okay, thank you.
And just specifically on the nature restoration law, if I'm not mistaken, the Commission's impact assessment found that for every euro invested, there were 8 euros in benefits. So they did analyze this.
another end question I would say, do you think there will be a turning point where when people will realize that we're in deep trouble, or no?
Next year in the summer, yes.
But did they realize really that we're in deep trouble?
Yes, I think there will be too much hot, so it will be impossible not to ask something.
All right. Are there any further questions or comments? If not, then please join me in thanking our speakers. Thank you very much for your speeches, for your lectures. They were all incredibly insightful, and we've learned a lot. We will have now another coffee break. There is coffee and water in the back side of the room. And we will reconvene at 4 o'clock for the closing session, which will be followed by an even more extensive discussion. In the next session, we will zoom in on freshwater resources in Hungary. And we will,